Hello, Mollie. Thanks for joining this brilliant conversation that we're going to have today. We're going to be talking all about how women are creating a difference in the very dynamic, very exciting world of wine and spirits and the new frontier of non-alcoholic drinks. Today, our expert panel, and you saw how expert they was because I just, those highlights for me are just some of the things that you ladies have achieved. It's just mind-blowing. But anyway, our very expert panel are going to share their incredible vast knowledge and experience of these really exciting dynamic categories, so you can get a taste of just how exciting the wonderful world of alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks can be. So let me quickly introduce today's panel. You saw a little bit of the introductions there on the intro, but let me start by introducing Mollie. Now, Mollie, I mean, gosh, there are only 418 masters of wine in the world, and you are one of them. So I want to get into in a second just what it takes to become a master of wine, because I don't think it's easy. Mollie, you're also an advanced sommelier with the Court of Master Sommeliers, a partner at Preferably by Winery, and an instructor at the International Wine Centre. You're currently the National Director of Wine Education at Jackson Family Wines and a partner for their Wine and Spirits division. And you're really, really passionate. And this, again, is super important, something that I think we're all going to talk a little bit about, but super passionate about shining a light on sustainability, particularly in the wine categories and those wines that are a result of regenerative farming, smart water management, and climate action, and all of those complicated kind of processes that perhaps we don't know anything about and we need to. So today, Mollie is going to take us through the often overwhelming world of wine. I find it intimidating, and I'm in this business, so I hope that you can give us some pointers. And you're also, I think, going to share some new and old world wines to help us uncork and relax when we're on our holidays or just spending time with other people. But talking of holidays, if anybody's in London, everybody should definitely check out Jane Peyton, because she is an award-winning historical pub tour producer, and these tours are steeped in history, character, and of course good beer. And your pub tours have been described as one of the top global experiences in the UK for 2 years running. But you're not just a tour guide, Jane. I mean, goodness me, you're another overachiever, drinks expert, broadcaster, pub expert. I mean, I'd love to be one of those. Writer, public speaker, founder of the School of Booze, which began in 2008 and was named as London and Southeast England's top 100 businesses last year. So you've trained through the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, the WSET, and the Beer and Cider Academy. How do you find the time? These are both, named as Britain's official education bodies for accredited training. Now, you've also, again, made me feel very lazy. You have achieved very many firsts. You're the first UK certified pommelier. We have to understand more about that. And the UK's first beer sommelier of the year. You've also broken a Guinness World Record, you're my hero, in an attempt for the world's largest beer tasting tutorial. I mean, gosh. You can also tell us what Jane Austen and Cleopatra like to drink, because you're a historian of drinks. And of course, this was obvious, you've been awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by Britain's Parliamentary Beer Group, and outstanding individual achievement in beer and at the Beer and Marketing Awards. Gosh, I mean, I'm out of breath introducing you two ladies. Goodness me, what a couple of experts that we've got for you today. So who am I? I mean, I'm no one really. I'm just here to just, help the conversation along. But you can probably see on the screen, my name's Claire Warner. I'm the co-founder of Acorn, which is a range of British non-alcoholic aperitifs and is the sister brand to Seedlip, which is the non-alcoholic category pioneer, which revolutionized what to drink when we're not drinking about 5 years ago. Before that, I was a long advocate of positive drinking, recommending positive drinking choices, encouraging more of us to consume less sugar, encouraging more bars, restaurants to offer no and low alcohol drinks for anybody who's deciding not to drink. Before that, ironically, I spent a good chunk of my career, 15 years, with LVMH's own Belvedere Vodka, where I created 13 award-winning vodkas. But the world doesn't need any more vodkas. The world needs more delicious non-alcoholic drinks, which is what I do today. So essentially, our common thread is to acknowledge just how important wine, spirits, and delicious drinks are to the happy moments that we have together. They enhance all of the moments that we spend together, and nothing really, scratches that itch when you're together. A glass of sparkling water doesn't really cut it when you want to have a good time with your friends and family. So for me, wine, Mollie, can be incredibly intimidating. Not only is it intimidating, but it can be quite male dominated as well. So for a woman perhaps looking to carve out a career in that industry, not only carve out a career, but really kind of reach the top of that career, where did you get your start? How did you get interested in wine? Take us through a little bit of your background.
So I think I first started getting interested in wine as I was working in restaurants, and had worked in a couple of restaurants that had pretty dynamic wine lists, and we tasted them every day along with the specials for the menu. So we had this discussion about wine and food, and I finally realized there was something outside of the, I'm going to admit it, White Zinfandel was the first wine I ever drank, and a good California Chardonnay. But realizing that there was more to the world of wine just beyond that, and that it could be an interesting conversation. So that really sparked my interest in culinary school, deepened that interest. We had a whole 6-week class in wine and restaurant management, and just started learning a little bit more about wine, and learned about old world wine, and it sort of opened up a whole new world for me. And once I got done cooking for a while, I went to work in wine retail, and then just dove headfirst into studying about wine. So the Wine and Spirits Education Trust and the Court of Master Sommeliers put a lot of framework behind the studies, but it certainly was a lot of fun.
I mean, you can study wine for years. I mean, you obviously have, and there's university degrees on viticulture now, and all sorts of aspects of wine, the business of wine. How does somebody who's interested in just getting to know a little bit about wine, start their journey? Where's a really good place for somebody to begin?
There's so much available that's on the internet. So I found a few websites that I really like. And there's one called Wine Folly, which I tend to go towards time and time again. Madeline Puckett was the woman who I think developed Wine Folly, but I think she's got a really fun way of just approaching wine. It's very visual. So you can get these little charts that show you what wines go with food. That kind of looks like a subway map, and, just a pictorial visions of what wine is and how wine is made. And not that it oversimplifies it, I think it explains it very well, but it makes it a little easier to digest. But I would start there, or even a wine book like Wine for Dummies, or The Idiot's Guide to Wine, or Karen McNeil's Wine Bible. I used to have that around at my house. When I'd be drinking a glass of wine, something new, I would have it in hand, and then have the Wine Bible close by, and I'd be drinking it and reading about it. So that's kind of how I started, very, very slowly.
I think that's a good tip, right? Because I know when I'm drinking a glass of wine, I mean, apart from looking at the label and thinking perhaps, what am I drinking, taking the time to kind of actually read a little bit about what you're drinking, get to understand a little bit more than just what's written on the label, is another way for you to start building that memory structure, because again, it's such an overwhelming category. But for those people who don't really understand wine, can you give us a little bit of a synopsis of how it's made? What are the processes, what goes into each bottle of wine, and how does the environment perhaps impact the result?
Yeah, sure. So the environment really has everything to do with it. And we, Jackson family, we are kind of farmers first before winemakers. So we started as a farming family and then moved into winemaking as it became necessary. But really, quality is made in the vineyard. So the care that you put into growing your crop gives you the best possible outcome later in the winery. But wine itself, it's very simple. It will ferment itself. If you put a bowl of grapes on the counter and just squish it up a little with your hands and left it for a couple of days, it would start to ferment, just like your flour and water mixture if you've made sourdough bread at all over the last few years. It's the same process. There are yeasts available on the skins of the grapes that then eat the sugar and convert them into alcohol and carbon dioxide. So at the very outset, it's a very, very simple process. But then again, it's also not so simple. So there are many things that you can do to wine as it's made, but essentially that's it. You pick fresh grapes, squish them to release the juices, either add yeast or use the spontaneous yeasts they're already on the skins, and you let it ferment. But you can ferment in stainless steel, or you can ferment in oak barrels, or you can ferment in cement tanks, and your choices there will change the way the wine tastes at the end. And then when it comes to aging the wine, you can age it not at all, or you could age it for a little bit, or you could age it for a long time in wood, or you could age it in cement. So you can really change some things up. And there's a few more processes we could talk about, but maybe we'll leave that for a second discussion. But it's fairly easy. So once you ferment the sugar and turn it into alcohol, you then either age it or not and get it into the bottle and get it out to you. It's pretty simple, very simplified.
You do make it sound so easy. I feel like just squishing some grapes on my counter and just, leaving them for a while. I'll have some delicious wine.
I didn't say it would be delicious.
No, exactly, not delicious. I always feel like grapes are just desperate to become wine. I mean, they have all of the ingredients just there, waiting desperately to turn themselves into wine. All we have to do is just intervene slightly with just by crushing or juicing the grapes, and it gives you so much. It's such an immediate beverage in that way. But talk us through a little bit about how the environment can really have an impact, positive or negative, on the quality of the resulting wine.
Right. So for a lot of the grapes that we grow, and for Jackson family wines, we really focus on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. We do make a fair amount of Cabernet Sauvignon as well, but Pinot and Chard are difficult grapes to grow. They need a cool climate. So with a warming of the overall climate, what we lose there is length of growing season. And it really is the length of the growing season that gives us complexity and flavor development in the grapes. So you could get them ripe, essentially, in order to make wine early on, say in the Central Valley, over the course of 90 to 110 days or so, and you would have juice that you can make wine with. But if you extend that growing season by putting your grapes in a cooler place, you actually get more range of flavors to develop and more tannin structure to develop, because those actually ripen later. So if you have a short window, you don't get that development, but a long window, you get that development. And with climate change, we're shortening that window just a little bit. So we're looking for cooler and cooler places for these grape varieties, or ways to extend the growing season by changing the way we farm, which could be row orientation or leaving a bit more canopy to create shade over the bunches of grapes and extend their growing season that way. But that really affects us for those grape varieties, is this shortening of the growing season. And we need that for this flavor development and tannin development and all those things that make great wine as opposed to just wine.
And I suppose it's such a fine balance, because you're trying to protect the environment and not use processes that are going to have a negative impact, while still trying to promote a positive result in the characteristics of the wine. How do you balance those two impacts?
So we do a lot of sustainable farming. All of our vineyards are certified sustainable, and I was looking at a chart just earlier to show the number of wines that we had that were certified sustainable, say 20 years ago, and now, and we went from 0 to like 350 wines that are certified sustainable. So, careful farming in the vineyards, no use of pesticides and herbicides. We really use raptors. We use owls for, combating pests and diseases. We managed to combat mostly through just careful viticulture and really maintaining a healthy canopy throughout the vineyard with the grapevines. And what else? We're reducing our water impact. So that's something that really, really helps. We only irrigate when it's absolutely necessary to irrigate. But yeah, the sustainability, and one thing that we've done that's pretty big is we have eliminated completely the use of any Roundup in our vineyards for the last 6 or 7 years, absolutely nothing. So, we farm about 15,000 acres of vineyard land in California and Oregon. And so it's significant when we can just not use something like that, which is fairly common to use on that large of a scale. So if we can do it, that should have a big impact on everybody else doing it.
Absolutely. And has that been managed purely by sort of enriching the biodiversity that you have at your vineyards?
Absolutely. We use a lot of cover cropping, and I love seeing the difference in the cover cropping from one vineyard to another. At Cambria Estate, there's tons of wildflowers and it's absolutely gorgeous. In other places, it's mustards or different grains, things grown in between the rows. But they all look very manicured, but also very alive and very, very healthy, which is fun. I've actually been stung by bees out in the vineyard, which is not my favorite part, but lots of flora and fauna. And we're actually using a little bit more biodynamics. So we have a little flock of sheep that we use in some of the vineyards to graze and add their personal fertilizer to the vineyards, back into the vineyards. So low impact in terms of carbon sequestration. It's very helpful, but it also is beneficial in so many other ways. Yeah, that biodiversity is really tantamount, I think, to what we're doing.
It's a real reminder, I think, that wine is a product of its environment. I think it's quite easy for us to separate what we drink, what we eat, from where it's come from and how it's been produced. But when it's all part of the ecosystem, that everything's contributing to the other, and the quality is then improved. It's a kind of, for me, it's like, why isn't everybody doing this?
Right. And it's so beautiful. So if anybody, gets a chance to go out to a vineyard, I think you understand the beauty of it, but then you also understand it's an agricultural crop. It's it's a farm, basically. Yeah. Very beautiful one.
Very beautiful. Yeah. I recommend everybody go to see a vineyard at some point.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's get into some of the specifics around what we should and shouldn't, what we should be drinking. If you can give us some recommendations for some of the perhaps new age or more modern wines that are defining some of the regions and the wineries, or some of the things that you're really passionate about.
So I know something I'm really passionate about is Gruner Veltliner, which is nothing really all that new or new age, but it's just a wine that I tend to reach for over and over again. And, being, late spring, early summer, and focusing on garden veggies, I think Gruner for me is one of those wines that's so food friendly with what I like to eat this time of year, which is basically anything from the garden. But something that I've been really enjoying lately is some of the fun pet nats that are around. I don't love all of them, but one of my favorites lately is this one called Astro Bunny, which is made actually by a master of wine in Australia called Tim Wildman. He's British, but he lives in Australia and makes these pet nats from Italian varietals. And they're just really fun. They're bubbly, so they work really well, again, with food, all times of day. So from brunch to lunch on into the evening. And they can range from being super dry and kind of almost sour like a beer. And I do like beer as well. Jane, you can talk more about that. But there's this almost bridge between beer and wine when you get to some of these pet nats. Or they can almost be just like, a classic sparkling. So I love the range of flavors and styles, and just the fun, funky labels and grape varieties that people are making them out of. I think it's a fun little exploration.
It's definitely, a very fun part of the category. I feel that there's lots of, fun, energy, experimentation going on with pet nat. There's a lot of kind of ways to perhaps recruit a slightly younger consumer, or consumer that's interested in bubbles, or perhaps doesn't want to, start spending lots of money on champagne. It's a nice sort of entry point, I think, for the curious.
And here in the US, it's a fun one for some of our wine regions that are sort of emerging. So in the Northeast, like Vermont and Massachusetts and New Hampshire, where it's too cold for classic Vitis vinifera, they're using hybrid grapes and often turning them into these really fun, sparkling wines that are just a really fun introduction, as you said, for a lot of younger people and people that are newer to wine, and then even jaded old drinkers like myself.
Well, I mean, thank you. I feel like, well, I'm thirsty for one. You know, it's 2:30 here. It's nearly time to get into the pub and to enjoy something delicious. But so thank you for giving us a little bit of a steer on, you know, how to navigate this kind of very big, intimidating category and some of the great things to give a try to. Which brings me sort of neatly into Jane and the wonderful world of pubs. And beer and cider and all things booze related. Now, Jane, tell us a little bit about the School of Booze, because this, you know, this is the type of school that I kind of wish that was around when I was a young girl, whippersnapper. You know, let us know a little bit about what to expect if we were to attend. What's on the curriculum at the School of Booze? That's what we all want to know, Jane.
Well, I'm glad you asked. At the School of Booze, you never graduate. It's lifelong learning, but you can do your homework in the pub, which I heartily recommend. I started School of Booze about, 14 years ago in 2008. And I wanted to have a business that combined what I was good at doing, which was production, writing, hosting, teaching, with being sociable, and to make money out of it. So I founded the School of Booze as a corporate events business, ostensibly. At the time, there was no education in alcohol apart from the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. Now, I do love wine, but I wanted to focus on beer tasting and cider if that would be possible, but there was no education. So I did my WSET, Wine and Spirit Education Trust training, which gave me the ability to taste professionally, because the principles of tasting any alcoholic drink, or any drink in fact, are the same, and they're transferable skills. Also, it would give me credibility, because I was going to be going to corporate businesses and saying, would you like me to host an event for you, a tasting event? So I did need to have some sort of education and credibility. Wine and Spirit Education Trust is recognised worldwide. Years later, the Beer and Cider Academy was established, and they started offering sommelier training, or pamelier if you're a cider sommelier. So I was one of the first people to take up that opportunity. By then I'd already started School of Booze and established it anyway, but it was extraordinary because beer is the world's favourite alcoholic drink, but it's very rare, it certainly was when I started, that you would get corporate businesses wanting to entertain their clients or have some sort of office jolly and focus on beer, because beer is seen as everybody's drink. And I won't say down market or déclassé, but it doesn't have the status that wine does. Well, I wanted to change that, because anything that you drink is only as down market as the person drinking it. So my intention in life, and it still is my intention in life, is to make people rethink beer and rethink cider. And I started off with beer because I wanted to focus on one thing. And almost immediately, my clients were international banks, tech firms, some of the biggest brands in the world, and my clients, or have been my clients, some of the best known brands that we all recognize. We all use those brands in technology, in digital, in internet, advertising. My favorite client is the Crown Estate. So the Crown Estate is the Queen, and they pay the fastest of all my clients. I have to say, when my invoices are paid, they are almost paid immediately. So thank you, Your Majesty. You know, I do beer tasting, gin tasting, wine, cider, any sort of alcoholic drinks tasting for some of their tenants in Regent Street in London, which is a big shopping street in London. Pardon me. And they're my favourite client, absolutely. That wouldn't have been an option to me had I not had education, had the credibility, started building up a profile, a public profile, a media profile as well. That all came about because of my beer knowledge, because it was unusual to have that type of intense knowledge, particularly for a woman actually, but also a woman who didn't look like your typical beer drinker does, which many people will think is a man, is a beardy man, is an overweight man. I wanted to dispel all those myths, and I have done quite successfully. So that's how School of Booze started. And then I became a training person for hospitality staff, for pub staff, for brand owners. They need to know what they're selling if they're in the beer or cider profession. So I do all sorts of things to do with alcoholic drinks, but my favourite part is going to the pub and taking people on pub tours. Absolute favourite bit of what I do.
I mean, there's so much to love about going to the pub and getting paid for going, right? I feel like you've timed this very well, Jane, because I mean, you'll know this better than me, but for me, anecdotally, I feel that beer has become, particularly the craft beer movement over the last 10 to 15 years has helped the consumer understand that beer can be more than those sort of 4 big brands that you might recognize when you go into the pub, that there's so much more that you can explore in the wonderful world of beer. We talked about this before, but I live in Walthamstow in East London, where there are, you tell me, I mean, there's probably 12, 15 microbreweries that have popped up now, all very cool places to hang out at the weekend. So beer, in a way, over the last 10, 15 years has kind of undergone a bit of a transformation in the eyes of the consumer. It's something that can now be seen as a premium drinking option.
Yes, very much so. And we have to thank the Americans for that, because something called the craft beer revolution started happening in America in the mid-90s. And it's gone around the world now. It'll be in India, it's in New Zealand, Australia. It's in every single country where there are breweries, basically, virtually every single country. And where there are younger people who want to brew independent style of beers or be more adventurous and not be beholden to the big established companies. So this is all about being independent. It's all about using your initiative and your imagination and just breaking rules. And you were saying earlier, Mollie, about some of the Aussie and the New England wineries. That's breaking rules. That is not looking to the heritage of the wine industry. And it's the same with craft brewing, and it's beginning to happen with cider, actually, with artisan cider makers. So rules are gone, and that's better for all of us as consumers and drinkers, because we get a much better choice. We get some inventive libations and just incredible drinking experiences. And for me, it's the best time to be alive for so many reasons, in alcoholic drinks in particular. And when you're going to be talking later, Claire, about the non-alcoholic alcoholic drink section, I'm involved in that, even though I have a business called School of Booze. But the beer industry, non-alcoholic, no and low in beer, oh my goodness, it's rocking. And it's exciting. So lots of excitement around, lots and lots of excitement and innovation and passion.
And interest, I think. The consumers genuinely interested. And I don't know about you ladies, but when, for me and for our brand, the pandemic, not to sort of dwell on the pandemic too much, but the pandemic really accelerated a lot of interest in what we do, because I think our consumers were at home, bored, missing going to the pub, missing going to bars and restaurants, wanting to have that sort of hospitality experience at home, and then went out to explore online what they could possibly find. And all of these great brands, independent brands that perhaps wouldn't have been looked at or wouldn't have been given the visibility because it's a crowded market out there, were suddenly being discovered by the consumers. This sort of a bored consumer at home who just wanted to experiment or to try something new and delicious. And now I think coming out of the pandemic, we've got this very engaged audience who are looking for the niche and the interesting and the exciting.
Now, I was just going to say, because it tends to be the independents that are driving this market, although you know better than I do, Claire. But again, it's about innovation, it's about experimentation, it's about natural ingredients and botanicals, and it's just fantastic. I love it, and I love exploring all these new drinks. Love it.
Oh, yeah. Now, one drink that you'll have to sort of persuade me on, Jane, is cider, because for a lot of people, their one drink they can't touch is tequila for reasons they might not want to go into. But for me, it's definitely warm cider. And when we were talking before, you were saying, no, we need to really rethink cider. We need to understand what's the difference between good cider and really bad cider. So explain a little more. Why do we need to rethink cider?
Cider, in this country anyway, I don't know about in the US, Mollie, but the first teenage hangover you ever have is usually cider. And it seems to stay with people because I talk to adults all the time and they'll say, don't drink cider. I once had a hangover as a teenager, and I'll say, and have you been hungover since on wine or whiskey or gin? And they go, yeah. Well, why are you still drinking that and not cider then? So unfortunately, cider has this reputation, which I'm determined to try and change, along with all the incredible artisan cider makers. Cider is two things. It's two different things. It's an industrial drink made by huge corporations, made out of concentrated apple juice, which is mostly water, sugar, additives, colorants. Hasn't been near an apple really for many years. No sense of seasonality whatsoever. That's the industrial version. Alcopops, basically. That isn't what cider is, but it's been changed by the bottom line, by the accountants who want to make a high selling, sweet, fizzy, easy drinking alcoholic drink that's going to sell absolutely loads for the cheapest possible product outlay, or the, you know, cost of ingredients. And then there's real cider, which is much more akin to wine, because you make cider in a similar way to wine. So you crush apples, you juice them, you crush them for the juice, and then you ferment the juice. Now, the artisan cider makers, like Mollie's cider winemakers, the yeast is on the apple skins, so it really slowly ferments the juices. You can, again, like with wine, you can ferment in oak barrels or cement containers or stainless steel, just like wine. You can age it if you want to, oak barrels, or you can use barrels that have had something else in them before, like the whiskey industry does, for instance. So one of the best ciders I've had recently was, it was a blend of apples that had been aged for 15 months in an ex-rum barrel, blended with apple cider that had been aged for 8 months in Chardonnay barrels. It was just sublime and incredible and musty and moorish. And I was really annoying to my friends because every time I took a mouthful, I just went, that is so incredible. That is incredible. It was extraordinary. That's real cider, which is made from 100% freshly pressed apple juice and no additives, no colorants. If it's going to be sweetened, you sweeten it with unfermented apple juice, not with fake sugars or sweeteners, just like wine, the way wine is sweetened with grape juice. Or you can ferment it completely to dryness. And Claire, I know you quite prefer drier drinks. Yes. So you ferment it completely to dryness, all the sugars are gone, and then you drink it. And if you don't know it's cider, then you think, oh, is it some sort of acidic white, a white wine, an acidic white wine? It's very dry. So sometimes it's hard to know what wine is and what cider is, if you're not a master of wine like Mollie, of course. So there's a lot to be said about cider, and I just wish more people would give it a try. Plus, without the cider makers in the 17th century in England, we wouldn't have champagne as a sparkling wine in the way we know it. So it was cider makers who did it first. They were experimenting with the secondary fermentation to purposely sparkle a drink. Now, up until that point, wine that was sparkling, or any drink that was sparkling, was seen as a fault. And then the cider makers went, no, we're going to do this on purpose and see what happens. And then it started happening with still wine that was imported into England from the Champagne region. And the wine importers started doing the same thing to get this secondary fermentation going. Even now, there are method traditional ciders. You know, there's a lot of makers who make cider in the traditional method, which is also known as the Champagne method. So if you open a bottle of that with that champagne cork, with the muselet, the metal cage that seals the bottle, it's in a champagne bottle anyway, with all that thickness of glass to keep the CO2 and the pressure in there. If you don't know it's not champagne or some sort of a sparkling wine, you don't know, because it's fermented to dryness, it's fizzy, you've heard the pop go off, and you think, oh gosh, this is good, isn't it? So it really works to surprise people who think they don't like cider.
So I think the last thing I just want to touch on, because I think this goes across everything that we all do, but just, Jane, I know that you've written multiple books on all different types of subjects. And I love when we talked about this, you know, the sort of thread that unites all of your work is just this sense of like how alcohol is a unifier, how it really does work to, you know, bring us all together. And Mollie, I don't know if you also want to touch on this as well, you know, just what is it, do you think, that's so special about what we drink and who we drink it with, that can help make us feel bonded to one another?
We do tend to, when our family gets together, reach for, either something bubbly or a light, crisp white, something that we just like to, enjoy together. But I don't know how that started. Maybe holidays. I know when we were kids, my parents used to, this might horrify you, I would open up some cold duck on New Year's Eve, and I used to hate it. My sister used to like it a little bit. My brother liked it. But that was the very first thinking of that alcohol coming out at a special occasion. So maybe that's kind of where we got started with it. But we could reach for something non-alcoholic, but we do tend to go bubbly or something crisp, fresh, white.
Yeah. Something that feels special, more elevated, I think.
Yeah, I think that's it, and the, beautiful cup of tea could also be that at the certain time of day. But, normally we think about wine.
Me too, and I'm not even a master of wine. What do you think, Jane?
Well, drinking alcohol historically has always been a ritual, and even now it's used in the rituals of several religions. Christianity, Judaism use wine in their holy rites. So there's a ritual element to it. There's also probably a supernatural deity element to it. It comes from the gods, whether those gods are monotheistic or pagan gods or whatever. Alcohol has always been something that brought humans together, and it can be used for several reasons. It can be celebratory, or it can be bonding and uniting. It can be making connections, networking. We still do that. Now, that's gone on throughout history. We commiserate with alcohol. We feel better with it, or we feel worse with it. It has so many purposes in life. And I'm really fortunate because I do a lot of business with overseas companies who are coming into Britain for corporate events, and they hire me to give them a pub experience or a tasting experience. Now, we don't speak each other's language quite often, and I work with translators. And so I'm doing my bit in English, and then I'll do a bit of terrible accent in whatever their language is, and then they're very pleased to have a translator because I'm ruining their beautiful language. But what's brought us together is alcohol. And we start off as strangers, and really quickly we're really good friends. And that's alcohol that's done that. Now, as you say, Mollie, you could do it with a cup of tea. You could do it with a non-alcoholic version with Acorn, for instance, Claire. But there is something supernatural about alcohol in the way that it unites people and brings people together, regardless of their mother tongue. And alcohol, I often describe it as a lingua franca. So it's a universal language. And even though you don't speak each other's language, as long as you can smile and look friendly and raise a glass and chink it, you're friends.
Yeah. I read a really great article by Professor Robin Dunbar, who talks about alcohol being really the reason for humanity, and that it's because it quickly releases endorphins, which help us feel connected and bonded to one another, and less threatened. It's one of the accelerants to civilization. So we discovered alcohol, we would consume it in the evenings when we were sat around a fire. Those sorts of rituals, as you mentioned, Jane, are very primal, and they tap into very old parts of our brain that do help us forge these powerful relationships to one another, so that we can get stuff done thousands of years ago or today, just become firm friends very quickly. But it is a powerful way for us to not feel threatened and to connect with one another, which is why I think it permeates so much of our society. It's a very promiscuous drug. I mean, it taps into lots of different parts of our brain, and it's makes us social, makes us happy, makes us relax, all those different types of lovely things. But that sense of releasing endorphins and helping us feel like we know someone better. It's not about being drunk or being relaxed. I think it's literally just the power of connection that is accelerated through having a drink with somebody. But you can still get that with something non-alcoholic, which I will explain to you when we get into a little bit of conversation around Acorn and how Acorn is made. But thank you, Jane. Super interested. We didn't talk about how you can become an expert in pubs, but we can have that chat in the pub another time. Now, who wants to learn about, nobody now, because we talked so much about wonderful wine and wonderful beer and cider and everything, but who wants to learn a little bit about the wonderful world of non-alcoholic drinks.
I want to learn a lot, not just a little, a lot, please.
Absolutely.
There's lots going on, lots to learn about.
So how did you get started with Acorn and with Seedlip? And
so, you know, I spent a long time in the beverage alcohol industry, specifically in spirits. Vodka's my jam. I adore everything about sort of culture, the history, just the accessibility of vodka. I learned a lot about how to make great vodkas. As I mentioned earlier, we made some delicious award-winning spirits during my time. But for me, I was, throughout my career, balancing this desire to be in the drinks world, but not actually wanting to drink very much, particularly as I was getting older. And I was finding that, you know, my diet of martinis and, you know, being out on a plane or, you know, traveling a lot and, you know, drinking, not heavily, but just drinking, you know, more than I wanted to, began for me a personal sort of journey as to how I can drink better but less. How can I drink less sugar? How can I drink less alcohol? How can I still have a delicious drink that's more elevated than sparkling water? And mix up in all of that, I started to get very interested in how nature can be restorative and how nature can help us feel better when we're stressed, anxious, depressed. And so those two worlds, the worlds of the vodka brand and how can I bring nature more into what we were doing at Belvedere, led me to a guy called Ben Branson, who at the time was a fantastic designer. He came to talk to me about how we could modernize the Belvedere brand and bring more natural elements into the branding. But we became very firm friends. And then about a year or two later, he came to me and said, I'm developing this non-alcoholic spirit. Would you help me with it? Would you try it? Would you let me know what you think? And I laughed. I think I was maybe one of the first people to say that he was crazy. Anyway, thank goodness he persevered, and he went on to launch Seedlip in 2015, which really sort of helped us all collectively articulate that dilemma of what to drink when you're not drinking. I was struggling with it. I was, you know, what do you drink when you're not drinking? But he created Seedlip, which for anybody that doesn't know, is the world's first distilled non-alcoholic spirit. So taking all of the process that alcohol goes through to be distilled, but instead using that process to distill the flavors out of these incredible ingredients that he sources from all over the world. And the result is something that's white and complex and mixable and creates really delicious cocktails that you feel as though are you know, more complex and multifaceted than something that's just made up of syrups or cordials. So he was very successful there. And then a few years later, he came back to me and said, you know, I want to create a non-alcoholic category. We can't just do it with one brand. Would you join me and create something complementary to Seedlip? So we created Acorn, which is a range of aperitifs. Aperitivo, if you're in Italy, and Jane, Mollie, you'll know, but some people don't understand what an aperitivo and aperitif is, but it's essentially something that you drink before food to make you hungry. And there are some great examples that you'll find in Italy, very famous examples. Lots of them are red or orange. Lots of them are sort of served as a Negroni or as a spritz. And we decided that we would be inspired by the European aperitivo tradition, because it's great to be able to drink delicious drinks and eat food with friends, again, very convivial, trying to maintain sort of social cohesion without removing alcohol, by taking alcohol out. And so we created a range of aperitifs, and we borrowed a lot of, I suppose, the flavor profiles of Italian aperitivo. We also looked at vermouth, which is wine based, as you'll know, Mollie. And we also looked in the history books. Jane, I don't know if you know this, but acorn juice was used in the 15th and 16th century as an appetite stimulant, as a digestive aid. And so we were like very curious. We're like, what do acorns taste like? And they are very, very bitter. And so we decided that we would put some acorns as our British bittering agent into Acorns, as our range of aperitifs need to be bitter and stimulating. And we'd also use English sparkling wine grapes as the base. So we use Verjus. Verjus is what is known as the green harvest. I feel embarrassed now because I'm telling a master of wine what a green harvest is. But a green harvest, for everybody else who doesn't know, is the first press of grapes that are not necessarily needed for the harvest of wine. So they're the earliest grapes that grow on the vine that need to be thinned so that the sun can be concentrated for the grapes that will go on to make wine. So we take those early grapes from a winery or a vineyard in Sussex, press them, aromatize them, add our acorn juice, and we've got this range of very complex, beautiful aperitifs ranging from very bitter and red all the way through to slightly sweet, smoky, and something dry and more sort of like a dry vermouth in the middle. So it's something for everybody, essentially.
I love an aperitivo, and I really want to taste acorn, yeah. Really want to taste it.
Wow, we'll get you some. But what I was going to mention, because it's very important to me that the social aspect is that we cover off, is that one thing I didn't realize is that, yes, alcohol is this great accelerant to social connection, promotes all of the endorphin response, but also bitterness or anything stimulating does the same thing. So spicy, bitter, those flavors also create an endorphin response. So if you're not drinking alcohol, but you still want to get that feeling of contented bondedness, and you want to have your appetite stimulated, find non-alcoholic drinks that are very bitter, such as acorn bitter. They'll do a very similar job, and they'll help to complement the food that you're eating, which is also quite difficult when you're not drinking alcohol.
That's fascinating about bitterness creating endorphins, because it's it's the endorphins that are giving you that fantastic time together, and as you said earlier, that bonding. Yes. Session. So that's really fascinating. So, I mean, I know that a G&T or a Negroni or an aperitivo or a beer, in fact, a lovely bitter beer as an aperitif, that's what you should be drinking. Yeah. Didn't realise there was an endorphin factor in there as well. That's amazing.
Oh, see, I taught you something there.
Yes, but also it could account, and not all beers are bitter, by the way, but a lot of beers in the pub are bitter. And people in the pub are drinking, and they're bonding, and they're having this great time together. I wonder if there's a connection with that, because they're suddenly not just getting the alcohol feeling, they're just getting an endorphin from bitterness as well. That's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's another reason why, alcohol, we think, oh, I have a drink and I get very hungry, but actually the bitterness in alcohol plus the alcohol itself can, increase your appetite and will make you overeat. I have to just give everybody a heads up. If you're drinking alcohol, you will overeat. So
the munchies.
You get the munchies. Yeah, exactly. So conscious of time, I'm just going to wrap up. Thank you, ladies. Such a great conversation. This conversation is all about trailblazing women. So thank you for doing what you're doing and continue to blaze a trail for women everywhere who are thinking perhaps about getting into our fascinating industry. Mollie, if people want to know more about what you do or your wines, where can they get some more information?
They can get some more information about Jackson Family Wines at either jfwthekey.com, which is it's our website that we use to find information on a lot of our wines. So there's a lot available there, or just at jacksonfamilywines.com. And one thing I'll leave people with too, just talking about women in wine, the company is owned by a woman. Over 50% of our winemaking staff is women, and over 60% of our senior management staff is women. So it is a very strong women-led company. Some of that you may not find on the website, but you may come across it. It's something just really interesting.
No, thanks for making that point, because I think it's important that we, promote this industry as somewhere that women can actually succeed, and I love what you're doing there. So thank you for giving that a shout out.
Sure.
Jane, where can people find you when you're not at school, in the pub? How can people get more information about where to get involved with what you do?
just put School of Booze into a search engine and my website will come up as the first one. And I would always say to people, go to the pub, ideally with me as your tour guide, and I'll show you the best pubs in London for history and best beer as well, and beer snacks.
And for me, you can follow me on Instagram at Hello Claire Warner, or go onto your favourite search engine and look up Acorn Aperitifs. We have a funny A at the beginning of our brand name. It's called a diphthong. It's an old English way of putting an E and an A together, but otherwise it's AECON, so acornaperitifs.com. And thank you, ladies. It's good to have this conversation and just remind everybody that no great story ever begins with a glass of sparkling water. So everybody needs something much more interesting in their glasses. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and see you next time.
Thank you.